Hello, and welcome to today's event on generative AI and the future of education. My name is Jillian Diebold, and I'm a policy analyst here at the Center for Data Innovation, which is a think tank that focuses on the intersection of data, technology, and public policy. We're here today to talk about the new generation of tools like ChatGPT that are turning education on its head. These tools are a branch of generative artificial intelligence, basically AI models built on massive data sets that generate unique images, sounds, videos, and text. Today, we have a fantastic lineup of panelists who will hopefully help us kind of dive into these issues. First, we have Deepak Sekar, who is the co-founder and CEO of ProfGym, a generative AI company that helps educators create unique content based on traditional textbooks. Next, we have Dr. Tori Truss, an associate professor of learning technology at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. We also have Tony Wan, who is head of platform at Reach Capital, a venture capital firm that invests in edtech. And last but not least, we have Jeff Young, managing editor at EdSurge. I'm hoping today will be an open discussion. So for those watching online, you can submit and vote on questions using Slido. And if you're watching on our website or one of our other streaming platforms, you can find that link below the video. There are so many competing narratives out there about generative AI right now. It seems to be unavoidable to kind of open the news and without seeing some kind of either praise of ChatGPT or see an op-ed kind of talking about how these tools will be the downfall of education. Some say it's revolutionary, while others don't really believe the hype. So to start us off, I'm hoping we can go around and do a quick temperature check. And just tell me whether you're optimistic or pessimistic about the technology and why. Deepak, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I'm optimistic about the technology. These tools are in their infancy and they're going to get way better with time.
Tori?
I'll go ahead and go next. I am cautiously optimistic. I think there's a lot of great potential. I've seen research showing that ChatGPT is already been helpful for improving productivity, but in a way that reduces equity gaps from workers. And I think there's great potential for specifically students with language and learning disabilities or communication challenges, non-native speakers, that kind of levels the playing field. So I think there's great potential with this tool.
Definitely. I'm hoping we'll get into some of the opportunities for inclusion today. Tony?
Hi, I lean optimistic. I like to think of ChatGPT and AI not just as a tool, but also as a skill, something akin to Google search. Like search is powerful, but you should be skeptical of the results. And I think once we learn how to harness that and have some guardrails around it, I think we can do some pretty cool things. I think as a creative tool, it can really help accelerate and enable the building of new ideas, turn something from ideas into an app or a prototype. So that's really exciting. But what makes me a little bit cautious is that I also think that there's going to be a lot of not so good content and stuff that it can also create. So one of the earliest use cases is in content marketing materials, and the fact that the possibility of getting flooded with even more ads and spam does not excite me. So, but I'm generally optimistic.
And Jeff?
Yeah, I feel like I've been covering technology and innovation for so long. I feel like now I know what to say to this answer, to answer this question, which is that it's got to be both. This idea that it's going to be mostly great or mostly bad is, when the iPhone, somebody here at the South by Southwest EDU conference where I'm at this week said it's like, this is like the most talk of a consumer tech since like the release of the iPhone. But when the iPhone came out, no one was as worried about it taking jobs or reshaping the society and education we know of. But I think now we're all more sophisticated. We've seen big changes come. And now I think we know that it absolutely will come with amazing innovations that we won't be able to remember when there wasn't this. And also it'll come with things that we are pulling our hair out over and are like, wow, I still don't know how to deal with this fast changing technology. So I am just going to say, I know both are coming.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think with pretty much all ed tech and technology in general. It's kind of how you use it more than, its inherent value. So I think to start off, it would be useful to just go around and maybe we talk about, some of the ways students and teachers are using generative AI tools right now, or might use it maybe in the near future, and then for the longer term. Tori, could you start us off maybe talking about that?
Yeah, I think we're still in its infancy. I mean, ChatGPT was just launched in late November, and other tools have come out towards the end of 2022, and more tools are on the horizon. So I think educators and students are still trying to figure out how it can be used and should be used in education. The most common use I've seen from students is not plagiarism, but is actually brainstorming, idea forming, helping with clarification of written language and communication. So I think there's a lot of potential there. For teachers, faculty, I think they're still trying to figure out the best uses. I've seen some who are using it as like a critical media literacy or information literacy tool to kind of analyze the output from ChatGPT. Others are mostly having conversations around like, how do I or should I change my academic integrity policy? And then I've seen a few creative uses, like using it as a example generator, because teachers are coming up with examples all the time, and that takes a lot of time. And now ChatGPT can do it within seconds. I've seen another educator who's used it for simulation and roll through, and even researchers who recommend using it as a teachable agent. Because I think a lot of people forget that ChatGPT is not just spewing information, but is a chat bot. So you could have students like try to teach the tool the content that they're learning, and when you have to teach, you deepen your thinking and understanding. So I think there's some creative uses, and teachers and faculty are still very much figuring out the potential for this tool.
Thanks for that. Tony, could you speak about some of the, some maybe the most interesting or inspiring use cases you've seen?
Yeah, the ones that kind of delight me a little bit are the tools that are being piloted now in classrooms, where kids get to create their own storybooks. They put in some prompts and they can generate a really richly illustrated books that they can then share and with their friends and then read. And I think there are some of these tools that also allow teachers to select some of certain vocabulary or other English language mechanisms that they want the book to incorporate. So I think the idea of these tools as a vehicle for letting kids be the agent of creativity and let them like produce things that they want and see it come to life to create enriching materials is something that's pretty encouraging and seems pretty delightful. I think in the broader kind of ed tech industry kind of spectrum, there is a hope that ChatGPT or AI can be some kind of AI tutor. That's always been like the holy grail of for the industry, and I think there's a lot of hope and enthusiasm for that, but I think that's a little maybe premature at this moment. I think it's good for creativity. I think it's been described as a calculator, but calculators don't hallucinate and make up things. So I think it is good if you kind of have a baseline understanding of like what good looks like, and it can help you get to that point. But you still kind of need that kind of foundational knowledge of basics to know like what good looks like. And I think that is still very much in the domain of teachers and humans.
Definitely. Deepak, coming from the industry perspective, you're working on building these tools. Could you give your opinion on kind of what good looks like, or what you're kind of aiming for right now?
Yeah, so I see applications in the short term and the long term. If you look at these GPT technologies right now, they're about 3 orders of magnitude less complex than the human brain, maybe 4 orders of magnitude less complex. And the way technology is going, the next five years or so, you're going to have systems which start approaching the human brain in terms of complexity. And then these tools will hallucinate much less. They're going to have a lot fewer issues. So what you see today is going to be very different from what you see in 5 years. And I personally saw the transition from GPT-2 to GPT-3, when it just when the complexity went up by a couple of orders of magnitude, and the tool started doing magic after that. So you're going to start seeing dramatic changes long term. So in the short term, I see a few uses. Okay, so one use is we are now able to generate homework questions automatically, and tailor them based on the student's history. And you can grade homework much better as well. So I do see it helping teachers create homework easier and grade them easier. It will save teachers time. One application we've seen is with substitute teachers. They were so hard to find during COVID, and there's still difficulties right now. So what some schools want to do is they want to have videos created automatically using AI for all the lessons they have. And they want to use that as a backup in case a teacher falls sick the morning of the class or something. Uh, so that's another application for substitute teaching. We can already take textbooks, scan the textbooks, and convert them into video automatically. That's what our company does, and we're getting great results right now. So you can actually create online learning videos very easily using this technology. Uh, there's benefits with personalized education as well. Depending on the student, you can change the type of learning. Those would be more medium term than short term. The technology still needs to improve some more for that. And even tutoring is more medium term than short term. But long term, these sorts of things, they're going to really impact our lives. And you're just scratching the surface now, looking at ChatGPT the way it is right now.
Thanks for that. Jeff, I'm kind of curious if you've seen, I know this technology is in pretty nascent stages, but have you seen, or what do you think, how do you think this technology will impact learning outcomes? Do you think there's potential for that? In a positive way. I think right now I'm kind of hoping to talk about positives, and then we'll get into some, maybe, but in terms of outcomes, student outcomes.
I talked the other day to a Yale professor of English, and he, I think, said something that I thought was really, really interesting to your point, which is that he was talking about how hard it is when you have students coming in to, college and first starting to write their essays, that a lot of people turn in things that are, even if they're doing the work, it's not about that. Like, they turn in things that are pretty boring. And in a way, by having him opening up ChatGPT and saying, like, if the prompt is to synthesize some essay but then add to it in some interesting way, he can quickly show them that in 10 seconds this ChatGPT can summarize the material in a way that is like, kind of a passing paper. But if that's all they do, the students are, they're basically being a bot. And ironically, like, the students, he says, seem to respond to that desire not to just be a bot in a way that he's like always told students that you need to be interesting, you need to be creative, you need to be adding something unique to the argument or to your, to what you're bringing to your expression. And somehow having this tool which shows the basics so quickly, like, he thinks inspiring his students to be more creative in that they don't want to just be replaced by a bot or like be something that's so equivalent to a bot. And I do think that kind of shows that there could be, depending if students are doing their own work and doing the thinking and learning all the skills that, teachers are still saying you have to still learn how to write essays, even though this tool can do it. It'll just push us all to the hope is like it'll push the learning outcome to be stronger because this baseline might be a little higher of what it means to kind of synthesize something and then go further.
I think that makes sense. And I definitely wish like I had been able to use ChatGPT to get these examples of maybe not what not to do, but, like you said, boring writing, because sometimes it's, a professor can give you one example. That's not that helpful when you can have many. That's always something good. I'm kind of curious also just how, you were kind of giving a example from higher education, but maybe Tony or Tori, do you have any examples? How do these uses or maybe impact on learning outcomes change depending on the grade level or the potential of these tools?
I mean, I'll just piggyback on the writing side. I mean, I think that my hope is that ChatGPT or AI can help really expand and diversify the kinds of writing assignments and examples that I think kids, and students get introduced to. I will just speak from personal experience. I found, I learned how to write using the 5-paragraph essay or the 12-page research paper, and that got me through school. But then, I think when you come out into the real world, I mean, depending on, where you work, you quickly find out that there are other like different kinds of communicating and writing that may be more, effective or that are more desirable or, in that line of work. So I would like to see that, this is a tool that can take, a certain assignment and, expose kids to different styles and different ways to communicate your thoughts and your thinking. And yeah, I don't know if I've seen anything, being built in this regard yet, but I am hopeful that, there are. One of the first things that I did when I first found out about GPT and the fact that kids were using it last summer was that I took all of my old articles that I wrote at EdSurge. I used to be at EdSurge, and then I basically fine-tuned it on GPT-3, and I just created a bot that kind of spits out like articles in my voice. The downside is all the facts are fake. So essentially it's a fake news bot that sounds like me. I don't know what value that has, but I think in seeing its output and seeing the fact that, AI can basically replicate my syntax, my structure, my setup of quotes, phrases, and words that I rely on a lot, it was kind of eerie, but it was also, it made me kind of think and reflect like on kind of like what I think of as my voice. And I think that kind of feedback is it can be really valuable in helping kids not just like think but also develop like their voice as well, because writing is thinking and writing is also part of your how you develop your identity and your voice. So I don't know, I'd love to see some push innovations in that regard on both the K-12 and the higher ed fronts.
That makes sense. Could you or anyone else kind of expand on, I think we talked about, well, so now you brought up the point that, these tools are kind of making things, they're not saying facts all the time. And then I think you or someone else also said, use the word hallucinate. Could you expand on what that means just for our audience so we all understand, how these tools are working and what their kind of goal is, if they are supposed to be, giving you sources or just sort of are, like you said, mimicking syntax and style and things like that?
Maybe Deepak can go into a little bit more deep on the technical side,
Yeah,
but as I
Deepak, can you
understand
do
it,
more
these
deep?
language models, they're trained to predict the next word, like in a sequence. It's trained on the whole corpus of the internet text on, billions of parameters, but essentially it's all trained on internet text and it's all trained to predict like what the next word is. So I think the main gist of it is that it's just not sometimes it's not accurate, or sometimes it's not even like irrelevant, to kind of your prompt or the question. But
Yeah, I think it's one of the big, not myths, but just misconceptions, is that it will give you all your sources and sort of give you the, it's indexing the internet in a way that I don't think the tools are right now.
Yeah,
So I
so
think I
there's
kind of want to, oh, sorry.
there's a few things which are going to happen in the next year or two, which are going to reduce the problem significantly. One of them is you're going to start seeing augmented language models, which don't just predict the next word based on other writing it's seen. It also looks at regular search queries like Google or Bing and augments the language model's output with search results. So it will hallucinate less. So that should make things a bit better. Another thing you're going to see is more watermarking. So when someone is writing a 5-paragraph essay with GPT, I'm hopeful that ChatGPT will add watermarks, so you can actually tell when someone's got ChatGPT to write the essay. And the way it does that is normally the words are chosen completely randomly, but with uh, if you watermark a chatbot like that, it starts having a certain pattern to the way it creates the sentences, and you can tell that it was created by a chatbot. So hopefully, some of the cheating applications will be less prominent a year from now once they have introduced watermarking. So I think someone needs to speak with OpenAI and make sure they implement watermarking soon, because that's going to be pretty important. And then as you start having more and more parameters, as these language models get better and better, you're going to see it hallucinate less as well. So it's going to get better. These are just issues with having an infant uh, technology.
Right. So moving a little bit into the more of the negative side of these things, Tori, could you talk about how you think, I mean, obviously we've already touched on cheating, that the plagiarism panic is kind of the big one. Is this the end of the 5-paragraph essay? All that. In general, I'm kind of interested in hearing your concerns with these, cheating, maybe, how educators should respond to concerns about generative AI and cyberbullying, deepfakes, things like that. Could you speak on that a little?
Yeah, I think with any technology, and especially artificial intelligence technologies, there's potential for misuse, and there's a lot of inherent risks and dangers if you don't critically interrogate these tools before using them. And unfortunately, what I've seen is kind of two responses. One is the let's ban all technology in the classroom and go back to old-fashioned practices of handwritten and oral exams. And the other is let's dive right in. And both of those can be very problematic for the teachers, especially in K-12 schools who dove right in to using ChatGPT without reading the privacy policy in terms of use. There's issues around the privacy policy states that you need to be 13 or older to use the tool because it would be a violation of the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act because they're collecting massive amount of data. They actually just changed their terms of use so that it's if you're under, you still have to be 13, but if you're under 18, you can now use it with family permission. But I know there's issues around asking students to use these tools and whether that's appropriate for them to let their data be collected by OpenAI, and then issues around what happens when OpenAI in their terms of use and privacy policy state that they will not delete any user prompts or inputs. So they'll delete a user's account data, but anything that you put in as a prompt, like if you asked a student to write about, a traumatic experience, a mental health issue, or anything along the likes of that, that becomes a permanent record for OpenAI. So there's definitely privacy and data issues. And then we've already talked about misinformation and hallucinations. I've seen some educators call ChatGPT one of the most powerful tools for misinformation to date, because now, nefarious actors can create misinformation within a matter of milliseconds to share widely online rather than having to think creatively about what to write. And then there's, of course, plagiarism and ghostwriting. And it's not just students, it's other media outlets, journalists who are trying to figure out, is it okay, or can I use this tool to do my writing for me? Or at what point do I need to say AI has generated this text? So, I think there's a lot of these risks. And the other one that I've seen is kind of the how the tool, focuses on predominant ways of communication and language. And that's not a risk that a lot of people think about, but writing teachers are excited to say, okay, students, you can use this tool to improve your writing. But what does that mean if a student who didn't grow up with the Western Americanized version of what English should look like? Does that erase their cultural expression, the way their unique form of communication? Because ChatGPT was trained on English language texts. So what happens when you're using it as a writing support or writing tool without thinking about what does that mean when it's offering feedback on writing? So these are some of the several risks and misuses that I've seen. I'm sure I'd be happy to talk more about these, but I'll hand it over to the rest of the group to share other thoughts.
Yeah, Jeff, do you have anything you might want to add on some of the concerns here?
I hope my connection is stable here. I think one of the things that I think Tyler Cowen wrote an article recently. He's an economist professor that I thought was really interesting, raising the concern about, will we be able to predict, as Deepak suggested, that something's a bot or not? And I think if we can, that's great. But I think one danger is if it gets sophisticated enough so that it isn't possible to make that detection anymore, then the potential flood of misinformation, it just makes information literacy, almost unteachable or unfathomable in some, potential scenario. And I think that obviously education is one huge factor of education is teaching students to be information literate. And one of the key things about that is understanding the source. And so whether we can maintain as users, as citizens, our ability to like determine what we're, the source of what we're reading, is like crucial to that. And so that's, I think, one of the big existential questions that will be a challenge. Certainly, if it's doable, it'll be a challenge to teach everybody. And then if it gets to be very difficult to do, even for sophisticated users, that puts us in new territory.
So would you support something sort of like AI literacy, maybe embedded in digital literacy curriculums? And do you think that would be effective, or are you kind of saying there's a tipping point where information literacy is gone?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you asked the potential downside. I'm not an advocate for any one process as a journalist covering these things, but I do think that it's only going to add to the calls for adding information literacy education at an earlier and earlier level to try to get to a world in which we can maintain that relationship with our technology, to make citizenship possible in the way we know it today.
That makes sense. So, Deepak or Tori, again, I'm kind of a big proponent of, of AI literacy curriculums. So if you were going to be designing one, for this type of tool for students, let's say, I kind of want to get into teachers next. For students, what would an AI literacy curriculum look like?
Yeah, the thing which worries me the most about AI is I have two kids, they're 11 and 8 now. I think about what they'll do when they turn 18 or 19. The world's going to look very different in 10 years. And the way we are educating these kids right now, I don't know if we are preparing them to be successful in 10 years' time, because the skills which are important now won't be important in 10 years. So, as an example, I'm Indian originally before I came to America, and a lot of Indian parents like putting their kids in programming classes. And I don't know why that is, but in 10 years' time, all the skills these kids are learning about Python and stuff like that, they're going to be irrelevant because we're going to be a lot of the low-skill software jobs right now, they're going to be automated away with AI, no doubt about it. AI can already write code fairly well. And in 10 years' time, you're going to see far fewer Python programmers out there. I like saying English is the new Python. You have prompt engineering, where you can actually get these AIs to do different things based on what you say to it. So the skills we're preparing our kids for, in 10 years' time, you're going to have robots which can actually move a lot better. You're going to have robots which can communicate with humans. Maybe you won't be using your keyboard to type as much. Maybe you're just going to be dictating things with voice. Voice is getting better and better as well. So I think we'll have to rethink our whole school curriculum to prepare kids for the world of 10 years from now, which is going to look very, very different from today.
So I'm kind of curious also, though, the role of the educator obviously is to prepare students for the future. So what kind of training and professional development is necessary for them? How do we, help teachers, help students? Tori, I know you were about to say something on the student side too, so you can do that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, in terms of the student side, I think it's an interesting point in time because AI has been deeply embedded into our lives for quite some time. I mean, Netflix recommendations, Amazon purchases, facial recognition to get into phones, the way that your social media feeds show you information. It's been shaping what students see, the way they think, the way they interact, without a lot of people thinking critically about what that means for their lives. And ChatGPT seems to be one of the first tools that makes AI visible and oh my gosh, there's a tool that can do something close to what humans can do. What does this mean? So I think when bringing AI literacy into education, it's starting with, we're already surrounded by AI. We're using it on a daily basis. It's influencing our behavior, our communication, the way we get transportation, the way we navigate. And what does that really mean when AI has been trained on data sets that are biased in terms of race, and sex, and various demographics? And there's several examples from many years ago around how AI has negatively impacted, especially Black and Latino individuals, disabled individuals, from everything from getting jobs to getting kidney transplants and being selected for medical procedures. So I think there's an absolute need for AI literacy, but it really starts with, like, what is AI and how do we understand, how are these tools designed? How are they trained on what data? And so that's what I was going to say for students. For teachers, of course, that training needs to happen. I actually just published an editorial on this piece with recommendations around, teacher educators, the ones who are teaching teacher licensure classes, as well as doing teacher professional development. They need to learn these skills and competencies, or at least be comfortable taking risks with learning these tools. They need to be role models for how you interact with AI, how you bring AI literacy into education. There's a couple tools out there, like MIT has an AI literacy series of activities, and a few other. There's the AI for K12.org site. So there's some resources out there that teachers can turn to. But I think that's just the start in having teachers learn to write lesson plans that incorporate those types of activities. But also, I think teachers need to learn how to, if they're going to be using tools like ChatGPT in their classroom, and we talk about how ChatGPT can serve as a teaching assistant, like writing homework activities, we need to critically analyze what ChatGPT produces. Is it going to reproduce or exacerbating existing societal issues and inequities? As when you ask it to write a lesson plan, is it going to be a very teacher-centered lesson plan where I've seen the lesson plans it's designed. It's like intro, hook, materials, pencil, paper. Sometimes it'll have a tool, intro activity, this, conclusion. And I'm like, yeah, it's helpful for brainstorming, but we really need to teach teachers how to critically analyze what it outputs, rather than just taking the materials and ideas that it generates and using them as is, because otherwise it's going to, I think, take education.
That makes a lot of sense. Jeff, do you have anything to add maybe on some of the other ethical considerations that have to be taken into account here?
Yeah, no, I think that the big question around that, I think Tori made these great points about, what the data is being trained on, since these are language models, and also, so who's left out of, what is taken for the expression that is, the norm, in when that norm becomes like really centralized around these tools in a way, that we haven't seen before. I guess autocorrect may be the current thing, but it's easier to ignore autocorrect, I think, than the world we're entering with these chatbots when they're built into search engines like Bing, which is obviously in the process of happening, and more, I'm sure search engines will have that. So as it filters into daily life, I think one of the big things is that sourcing, and whether it'll be a black box or whether there will be enough of a paper trail, digital trail for us as users, whoever you are in education and otherwise, to see what it is that you're really citing behind the scenes when it's feeding you information. And so I think just to kind of underline those points is really my answer to that.
So Tony, I mean, I think all of these things that we've just brought up make a lot of sense. Would you say that the industry perspective on this is really to focus on creating detection tools for ChatGPT and others, or, are tools kind of emerging to deal with some of these other things that we've talked about?
I think text detection is kind of a low-hanging fruit. I think there are at least like a dozen of these tools that are out there, and I'm not sure if they all work, they're all super precise. But I imagine that this is a solvable kind of a low hanging fruit problem, in addition with the watermarking technologies that Deepak rose. I mean, I think with like detection and plagiarism, I think we have to be pretty careful, because I think that the only one of the few things that are worse than cheating is being falsely accused of cheating. And we saw that with Turnitin, and some of the controversy surrounding that, and how it's affecting the relationship between students and faculty and that. So I think we want to be careful around that. But I think going back to the AI education side, I think what's been encouraging is I think we are starting to see more cross-industry kind of efforts to help educate and work with school districts about what AI is. Maybe not like all the technical nitty-gritty details around like how large language models work, but to give give teachers and students like a baseline understanding of like how is it generating like this stuff. Here at South By, I think there was just a press release this morning about this new group that launched called the AI Education Project. And it's like a coalition of a bunch of nonprofits from schools of education, academia, and also like school districts that are trying to rally and get ahead of this issue of teaching what it means to teach with AI. I think that a lot of innovation is going to come from the higher ed kind of community. I think I've talked to faculty at places like University of Michigan where there are schools of education that are collaborating, with their academic innovation department or the CS department to try to get ahead of these issues and create some kind of like papers and frameworks for how their faculty can, teach and what they should know. Duke is doing something. Stanford, did an event around this. So I think that these conversations that incorporate faculty from schools of ed along with all the different departments and areas that AI touches are, pretty encouraging. I don't presume to know how exactly it's going to change teaching and learning, but I think there are going to be some good ideas that come out, from these schools of ed working with others.
I think you bring up a really interesting point about how these tools kind of affect the relationship between students and teachers. I think, Tori, you've written a little bit about this, and I'm kind of curious if you could speak on that, how that relationship is shifting. And then I'm also something we haven't we've touched on a bit is that, some school districts just kind of took this reactionary stance and banned tools like ChatGPT. And so I'm also wondering, what are the implication of those bans and how that might affect the different relationship between, teachers, administrators, departments, students, everyone in the education world.
Yeah, I think the issue with banning the tools, there's several issues. Of course, returning to old-fashioned practices like oral exams, handwritten exams, cold calling students to explain what they submitted will increase the distrust that students feel in their classroom. It will increase fear, anxiety, and those type of experiences often lead to more cheating when really education needs to be about relationship building. It's also going to create more barriers for students with disabilities, for students with language and communication challenges. And I often don't see enough thought about how we help traditionally marginalized students with tools like this rather than just going straight to banning. And then, like places like New York City schools that have banned it on all their school, devices and Wi-Fi. There are students generally from more affluent homes who have their own personal devices, who have their own access to Wi-Fi at home. They're going to use the tools. They'll find a way to use the tools. And those who rely on school-owned devices and school Wi-Fi won't. And that creates more of an access and learning divide, because we already talked about the benefits for creative thinking, for writing, for communication, brainstorming, all of these different benefits that students won't get with these different types of bans. So I think that's really important to think about. And then the use of plagiarism detectors, similarly creates that feeling of, I don't trust you as a student. I'm assuming that you've turned in something submitted by AI. And unfortunately, and not surprisingly, the use of these tools is more common for students who are already heavily surveilled and monitored, traditionally marginalized students who teachers have, their own predisposed biases about, okay, well, this international student or this student from this lower income community has never been able to write this well. And all of a sudden they submit this. I'm going to run their work through a plagiarism detector. But this other student, more affluent, native speaker, I'm not going to check their work. And that's my worry, is it's going to create, even more surveillance, monitoring, potential suspensions, punishment for traditionally marginalized students and students who could benefit from these tools. So there definitely is this kind of important look we need to take on the relationship between students and teachers if we go the route of banning or detecting or surveilling students as a result of these tools, versus the opposite of AI literacy. Like, how do we help them learn about these tools so these disadvantages don't create more gaps and wider digital divide?
Does anyone have something else to add? I mean, I think that's a fantastic point, just about how it kind of creates that distrust between in a lot of the relationships. So I think to go into I think you'd already answered actually one of the audience questions, but people are kind of curious about, how the digital divide factors into these tools and what generative AI means for people that, don't have consistent or reliable access to the internet. I think if anyone wants to take this, how does the digital divide affect people's abilities to use this? And I think we've been kind of talking about this. This is the big issue. Can generative AI exacerbate or close inequalities? And then I'm going to follow up on this person's question, but I'm curious of what if we could talk about potential for increased inclusion in the classroom and how generative AI can actually help some of the more marginalized communities. If anyone can speak on it.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk. I mean, there are several countries around the world that still don't have access to ChatGPT. And even with Microsoft integrating ChatGPT into Bing, which should create more open access, it's still the individuals who have unreliable or no internet access. Not just individuals around the world, just like 30 minutes up the road from me, there's no internet access in the community. In fact, my colleagues love it. They go home and they're like, I can't check emails. I don't have internet access. But students who rely on that at home, whether that's in the United States or around the world, won't have access to a tool that potentially can help, as I've mentioned, kind of decrease some of the gaps in equity in terms of productivity or brainstorming or improving communication. Or, I've seen students with disabilities like executive functioning challenges who just struggle to sit down and write a paper. You could ask ChatGPT to have a sentence starter. Or if they struggle with, the revision or the, getting their thoughts out, they could write their paper and then have ChatGPT help with how you might revise it to improve the language, so they don't get stuck on these specific aspects that can be really challenging for students with disabilities, and make it hard to complete a project. So there are these aspects of inclusivity that if we ban these tools, or if they're just not available, whether it's in different countries, rural communities, we're going to create more of that kind of learning and access divide, which I think is really important to pay particular attention to. And we already saw that in the shift to emergency remote teaching, is the students who didn't have access to reliable technologies and internet struggled the most to stay up to date with the schooling that went immediately to, live Google Classroom or Google Meet or Zoom classes that students couldn't join, and they fell behind. So there's some really critical issues we need to think about with these tools and being launched publicly and what that means.
Yeah, I think we'll also have to step back and look at each one of these generative AI tools. Generative AI is a big space with many tools, and ChatGPT is just one of them. And we need to ask if ChatGPT is a net positive, right at this moment. At this moment, it's just helping students cheat. It's getting them to cheat on their homework. It's encouraging them to cheat as well, which is a bad habit to have. So at the moment, I would say ChatGPT hurts more than it helps. And OpenAI needs to take some action on it, introduce watermarking or something, and make sure it's a net positive first before we start worrying about digital divides and who has it and who doesn't. For example, kids who don't have smartphones are able to focus more. They're able to concentrate more on a topic. So I would say people without kids, 10-year-olds without a smartphone are often better off than 10-year-olds with a smartphone who sit on TikTok all day long. We need to first make the technology work for us.
So
I just want to jump in there if I can. It's of course how there's a screen time debate has been around forever, and it's really how the tool is used. So I wouldn't say that students without a smartphone are better off. It's maybe the students with a smartphone who are just mindlessly scrolling through social media on end are not using it for helping their thinking and learning versus those who are creating, civic action campaigns on social media at 10 years old to try to change local and public policy. So with any of these tools, it's not necessarily like, yes, no, this is horrible, or students are using it in bad ways. It's really teachers and parents need to have conversations with students, teach them about when and why they should be using tools. And I'm not advocating for always using technology. There's great benefits to just taking your smartphone and locking it away for a few hours and actually having that break, because we don't seem capable of doing that with the attention that it just keeps grabbing. But I do think that I just wanted to note with the screen time debates that continue to persist, there's a lot of myths around that, and there can be potential good uses as well.
Thanks for that. Sorry, Jeffrey, you can add.
Yeah, I might add that one of the points I've heard here at South by Southwest was really interesting, which is like in previous big world-changing technologies, even if you think about like came out of higher ed and the research community largely like with Google coming out of Stanford back in the day. But it seems like there is a sense where the public, companies are getting ahead of where the universities are. And it is interesting. I kind of wonder, as somebody covering this, whether, universities could potentially, in this case, could they create their own version that's very education focused, or that has the guardrails needed for education in a way that a company wouldn't have as much incentives to do? Or is there such a gap between where industry is on the development of AI and where universities are? And that's a question I don't know the answer, that isn't as possible in this particular brand of technology. And so I think it's like, again, it's, there will be many different versions of this AI technology rolled out. And will there be one that is kind of created with an academic intent in mind, maybe even without a profit motive? And it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out.
Definitely. I think to go a little bit into the audience questions, I'm looking through and I'm seeing two relating to chess computers. So I'm hoping someone here can speak about it because I cannot on this to answer this question. But the first one is that early on chess computers could be helpful in teaching, but now beat humans. So what happens when ChatGPT's descendants also exceed human writing capabilities? And then kind of a follow-up one would be that ChatGPT is getting everyone to kind of write more creatively, and just people are generally curious about the analogies with chess computers. So if anyone can speak on that.
So there
Right.
Okay. There are some tasks humans inherently will be better at long term. A lot of these AIs, they just follow formulae which they're trained on, and so it's hard to beat humans with creativity and thinking out of the box with these things. I think with the passage of time, there'll be some tasks humans inherently will be better at. Like I always encourage my kids to get in front of people and talk with people, and fundraise for causes and stuff, because it helps them develop sales and marketing skills, and it helps them communicate with people better. And a lot of these customer facing roles will be done by humans for a long time. I think even 10 years from now, even after these language models get better, there's going to be some tasks humans are going to be much better at.
Right. I think the concerns about, all AI kind of outpacing or exceeding humanity is just part of the general panic cycle with AI and all of technology tools in general, fears of automation, all these things. So I think your point makes a lot of sense that, there's some things that humans just will be better at, or that humans are just better suited for. Even if AI can do it, doesn't mean it should do it. So to move to another audience question, I think people, I think we've all seen probably that long form article about Bing Sydney and sort of the journalist who wrote it, kind of developing a relationship with it and whatever. And so one question from the audience is, what are the implications of students developing relationships with AI, growing up with a chatbot that has access to your chat history? And then I'm also kind of curious just about, let's say you develop a relationship in sort of a mental health sense of like, you're talking about your problems with one of these bots. What are the implications of that?
I mean, I think it raises all kinds of privacy concerns that I think Tori touched on earlier during this call. And I think that unless there is a defined guardrail and parameters around like what the proper use and sharing of that data is, or what happens in the event of a company liquidation or sale or whatever, I am personally a little bit cautious around around the privacy issue. I think I would also say that in the mental health, for stuff around mental health and for more like high stakes issues around that, I think we've seen instances where people have, tried, using AI to help suggest messages or, acting as like a mental health support chatbot where, things just go kind of awry for all kinds of reasons. And so, I would be a little hesitant, for some of these high stakes personal stuff where, safety and health are a paramount concern.
So would you say, let's say a policymaker is trying to come up with some kind of regulation or guidance on this, would you say focus on the high impact cases or just the technology as a whole? Where would you go first?
I mean, I think there's this, I think in AI, there's this principle of like having a human in the loop at some part during a process or experience. And I think it's important to like, build that in to, somewhere within the user experience that you have like a live human in the loop to just make sure that, things don't go off the rails, and where that step is, where that place is in the process will be different depending on the kinds of services you're talking about. But I think the general principle of, having a human watchdog, just be present and available should be, I would hope, part of any guidance or any rules that may come out of this.
You're seeing a lot of social media companies now. You're seeing a lot of social media companies now ask for regulation because they're being asked to judge on various sorts of things they don't want to decide on. And we've learned that after 10 years of social media. And with AI as well, there needs to be some sort of standards body or regulation which kind of dictates how the world uses it, or at least America uses it. And the standards body could say things like, you can't release this product without watermarking, where students all across the country can cheat with their studies, or things like that. And I think it'll be better for the industry as a whole long term if we do that. I hate bringing government into stuff, but there are some things where we do need to have some standards. Right now, a lot of products were launched pretty early because a lot of these chatbots rely on reinforcement learning from human feedback. So the person who's first to market gets a lot more human feedback and scale, and everyone else has a disadvantage. And so everyone's trying to introduce these chatbots into market quickly and get that human scale. And they're providing the tools for free. And that's what a profit-minded person would do, right? So there need to be some standards, some counteracting force, which looks out for society as a whole and makes these things better.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump on. We already saw what happened with Coco, which is an emotional support chat service for people to turn to for mental health and emotional support. And they swapped out some of their human respondents with ChatGPT, but didn't tell users. And of course, after the users found out, they completely felt tricked and deceived, and their ratings of the support provided, of course, went way down. So I think people still have that general reaction of, do you really want to go to AI for mental health support? But on the other hand, there are a lot of barriers. So, students in college campuses may be more likely to turn to YouTube for, anxiety and depression support rather than going to a college counseling services office, even though that's freely available to them. What happens when ChatGPT can, be the first line in offering some tips? But yes, it would have to be designed in a way of, here's a little bit of help, but here are resources to point them to getting more help. And the White House came out with an AI Bill of Rights at the end of 2022. It'd be interesting to see how they're planning to enforce that, if at all. But there is a lot of that. How do we build in this transparency and restrictions and try to prevent some of these issues where AI supposedly can take over humans' jobs without a critical look at what that means.
Right. I mean, the taking the critical perspective is definitely important, but at the same time, I think there is a good opportunity for, under-resourced schools or departments, to, like you said, use AI tools as sort of a front line, but I don't think it should be the be all end all. That's for sure. To go back to another audience question, it's kind of switching, but anyone who's really used ChatGPT, especially in a teaching setting, someone's asking, what are some good prompts to enhance teaching of a topic like public policy, science, or engineering? So I think the question is kind of just saying, how do you engineer these prompts to get, good outcomes? Like, what are maybe some of the tips you would have if any of you have really used them in that way?
I mean, I've seen some very long prompts that are like super specific. They're like a paragraph long, like describing, throwing in like a dozen variables in there and very situational stuff. So
Do you
I mean,
think that's what you have to get a good outcome? Like you need to give a million parameters for it, or?
I don't know if it always works. I don't know if more is always better, because we still don't quite know what are the certain prompts that certain questions or variables that it's good for. So I mean, I think a lot of it is still a little bit of like trial and error, but I think there are like forums on like Discord or like the other forums where I think people have created some guidance and tips around like, hey, like this set of variables is good for like this kind of like these kinds of questions. But it is impressive to see, like, there are certain times when some of these prompts are like a paragraph long and you get some very detailed thing around something that's, someone speaking in a Shakespearean voice, but also, creating new, what would Shakespeare, do as a metal guitar guitarist? Like what song would he write, in like 23rd century? So, I mean, it's fun. I mean, I don't know if it's precise, but I think it's fun. It can be fun.
Yeah, I'm always. Oh, sorry, Tori.
Yeah, I was gonna say, ChatGPT, as I mentioned, can really serve as an example machine, and this is something the Cult of Pedagogy blog, they wrote a great example of how to come up with that. And I'm thinking, public policy, come up with examples of laws that students should work on redesigning, or redesign a current law, and then have students analyze what that redesign means when generated by an AI. Or science, come up with 10 inventions that could solve water scarcity, and have students actually try those inventions out, try to build them and think about how to solve world issues. So I think there's great potential, but it does require, learning to use the tool and be specific with the prompts. As all the blogs I've seen from educators using it is, it's never the first try of read this, and they have to make it more specific. And it's really chatbot, so you can keep asking it to build or change the prompts and examples. So it does take some just playing around with, but I think there's a lot of opportunity in any subject with some creative thinking.
Thanks for that. I think we have time just for a lightning round before we wrap up. So I would love everyone to go around and just say, we've already been talking about this, but as generative AI improves, what's next? What's the next thing to look for in the next, let's say, 6 months to a year? Deepak, if you want to start.
Yeah, in terms of 6 months to a year, I'm hoping it'll make teachers' lives easier. Right now, with the early generative AI we have, it's actually made teachers' jobs harder because of the widespread cheating. So I'm hoping the tide will turn and teachers will find it a useful technology.
Tori.
Yeah, I think this has made it very clear the importance of AI literacy and AI education, and that really needs to come next in the field of education, K to 12 schools and higher education, every subject, every grade level, to live in the AI entrenched world that we live in today.
Tony.
OpenAI and GPT have taken a lot of the conversation, the spotlight, but I think we're going to see more specific and fine-tuned large language models that are more specific to use cases and data that is not just openly public, but more proprietary stuff in academia, stuff in very specific fields that I think can help us address some of these issues around accuracy and hallucination. I think we're going to get more precise models that we can use to deliver more fine-tuned outputs and outcomes.
And Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm really curious to see whether, I think one of the potential effects of this ChatGPT moment is that there seems to be a real conversation about changing the way teaching and grading happens at sort of especially high school and college. And the question is, what will this spur some changes that were already in the works as far as like, active learning and things that have been out there as something that is shown to be effective. And the question is, will this be the spur to really make some change in education? Some of it related to AI and some of it, frankly, like already being talked about before this technology came around.
Definitely. I think that's all the time we have today. So thank you to all of our amazing panelists and everyone online for joining us. This is just the tip of the iceberg on this issue. I mean, I think that's clear. So I hope that you all join us for future discussions. And in the meantime, please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or comments on today's panel. And I look forward to staying in touch. Thank you.